Okay, so welcome back to Electric Bastionland Deep Dive. This is part 5, and like I said, we're going to be looking at the Conductor's Guide today. If anybody's got any questions, comments, it's nice just to know that people are there. The vast majority of people that watch this do seem to watch it on YouTube in the days that follow, but it's so much nicer having people here to respond to, and to respond to the kind of nonsense that I'm talking about. So I really appreciate the viewers that I have at the moment, and it's good to hear from you. So if you think you've got a question and you think it's a bit of a silly question, just ask. So yeah, we've got Captain Lucky Luke, we've got Doc Larry's Portello, we've got Sherlock Hole 1, we've got Alter POV, we've got Alchemagician, we've got Turd Theory, we've got Chris P. Wolf, regulars and newbies definitely. So, the Conductor's Guide. Now, originally, this was going to be in the first form of what would later become Electric Bastionland. It was originally called just the Oddworld Supplement. And in fact, there was the idea that I could do it as 3 or 4 different supplements. So do a Bastion book, a Deep Country book, a Underground book, and a Living Stars book. Each sort of the same size as Into the Odd, and each one a different colour. So Into the Odd was red, and they'd form a nice little rainbow on the shelf. And the idea was going to be, it was going to be extra stuff for the referee, as it was called then. And the reason why, I spoke before about the failed careers and why they came in, but one of the things that sort of stayed the same was that I wanted the book to feel a bit like having a different GM screen for different situations. So if you've not used a GM screen, I don't like the idea that you're hiding things from the players. I don't use them for that purpose. But the thing that I do like about GM screens is having all the information that you need really clearly laid out in front of you, like a kind of cheat sheet. So what I wanted each spread in this section to be was sort of a spread that you could just lay out, and it's everything you need for that thing that you're doing. I spoke a little bit before about the name Conductor. I'm coming around to it now. I've used it enough that I don't feel ridiculous saying it out loud. I think doing these streams and the podcast really helped. So I think I stand by that decision now. So these little chapter openings, these were quite a late addition to the book. I always thought that the book should be able to speak for itself. And if I have to explain to you how to use the book, then it's a failure on the part of me. But I sort of came around to the idea after I just saw the same comments coming through again. And maybe you could design the book in a way that it doesn't need these kind of introduction chapters. But for whatever reason, I found that people were slightly, not everybody, but there were people that were missing out on what I was trying to do with the book because they were coming in with preconceptions, or they were reading it in a different way than I intended. So I allowed myself to have these little bits of prose at the start of the chapter, and I wanted them to be deliberately quite conversational. And when I say provocative, I don't mean controversial, but I mean they should get you thinking. These aren't like rules really. This is like, it is literally an introduction to get you kind of settled into this section and get you acclimatized to what to expect. So it gives you a little bit about the world, making it clear that no two versions of Bastionland are quite the same. You know, your version of Bastionland is just as valid as mine. And the thing that's really important here is, I will try and end on like a single phrase just for like a bit of impact. And the phrase, "This is a world discovered at the table, not inside a book." So you can buy this book and you can sit at home and read it, which I imagine a lot of us are doing right now because it's difficult to get a game together in May 2020 when this is being recorded. But if you're sitting and reading the book, that's not Bastionland yet. You're getting the ingredients together and you're building it in your head, but it's not Bastionland until it's at the table. And then what happens at the table might be different to what you planned. But that is Bastionland. It's the game that happens at the table. Okay. Conductor. Yeah, I was a bit harsh on Conductor only because I think it's one of those things. It's like hit protection. When I changed it to hit protection instead of hit points, I would say HP, HP, HP. But then when I said what HP meant, I would say, oh, HP is hit points when I'm sat at the table. And even though I'd written it's hit protection, it's so hard to unlearn that thing. And I've said GM for so long that I just about learned referee because it's kind of similar. So to use a word that's so different is a learning process, definitely. Oddsbard in the house. We've got Alex Sorensen, the real talent of the show, making me look bad. Right, let's have a look. Preparing the game. So it's the whole book was written for me. Like that's the thing that I always like about books is I like it, and you know, any kind of art really. I quite like things that have been obviously created because the creator wanted that thing to exist. I think that is a powerful motivator, and it leads to a sort of, you get like a kind of you get a very unified sense of purpose behind the book. And Into the Odd was the game that I wanted to exist, and then this is like an expansion of that. So a lot of the things that are written here, they are genuinely written so that when I sit down to prep a game, I will remember to do them because it's not things that come naturally to me. So I genuinely, when I'm preparing a game, will look at this spread. This is like my cheat sheet because it tells you things that I would forget how to do. So it became a bit of a running joke in a couple of the groups that I used to play in online on sort of Google Plus that I would forget to put treasure in the dungeon. So I'd spend all this time working on, you know, I really like having these kind of like toy box style things in dungeons where you get like weird items and like the kind of trick room, if you like, in D&D. And I like weird traps and I like weird monsters, and you know, I like the kind of monsters that aren't necessarily 100% hostile. So I've got weird encounters, I've got weird things to find and mess with, but the characters would come out of it and they'd say, well, we found a load of stuff that we're keeping and we found a load of weird entities, but we didn't get any treasure. And the key principle of treasure is that its value should exceed its usefulness. And I was putting too many useful items in there that people wanted to keep. They didn't want to sell all these cool, you know, portal guns and chainsaws and stuff they were finding. So I think it's important to have, if you're going to have treasure as a focus, you've got to remember to make it kind of useless to start with. And you've got to also think there's got to be a reason why no one's taken it already. And it's very easy to do that in like the underground because time and space shifts around. So it could just be that it wasn't there previously. And yeah, it doesn't need to be complex, but it can provoke thought. I think you don't need to overthink treasure. One of the obvious things you can do is make it big, heavy, expensive, and kind of ugly. Like you don't want to keep it. Like a giant statue or a giant painting or something. So it's worth a fortune, but you've got to work out how to get it back. And I think that kind of logistical challenge can be fun in small doses. I don't want the whole game to be about the logistical challenge of moving a giant, you know, a giant jade head that we've found. I think that joke starts to run a little bit thin after a while. So yeah, one thing I did do here, someone asked me recently about, oh, how much treasure should I put in the dungeon? And because I run one-shots quite often, I will generally put around £10,000 worth of treasure in the dungeon, but kind of spread it around. So it might be a few bits worth 2,000, a few bits worth 1,000, but I would have it roughly add up to about 10,000 so that if the group play an absolute blinder and really get their act together, they could potentially get enough money to clear their debt in one session, because we're not playing again next week. So they could get the big win, or it could just be that they've got kind of a halfway there. It's kind of like a little, you know, it's like a score, like, oh, we got 7,000 of our 10,000 debt paid off. You know, we're not going to play again, but we get a sense of achievement. But here I was quite stingy. You know, if you didn't get there in one session, make it worth £1,000. So by that, it's only going to take like 10 sessions to pay off their debt. So I would generally be a little bit more generous than that. But the thing to remember is, the treasure in the dungeon isn't the only treasure. I recently put out a little adventure for Electric Bastionland called Prison of the Worm Queen. And there, you know, there's a dungeon you can go down into, and you've got to find this Worm Queen, and there's a reward for bringing her back. And that's kind of the obvious treasure. But to get there, you have to go through this big mansion, basically, to get to the dungeon. And yeah, you could just decide to sack off the dungeon and create a heist game instead and go and raid the mansion for treasure. So the thing to remember about treasure is everywhere as well. And it's important to make that clear to the players. That's why I really put that at the forefront of this sort of sample adventure. Right, Dead Spice Liqueur. We're getting back into the cocktail references here. I think if I were to become a multi-millionaire overnight, I always say, like, oh, I don't understand these people that buy, you know, expensive sports cars, or they go and buy really flash watches or clothes. But as a bit of a cocktail nerd, if I did just have unlimited money overnight, I think there's a lot of like old bottlings of spirits and liqueurs that are based on old recipes. I'd definitely blow a bit of money on them out of interest. So yeah. Oh, we've got questions here. Oh well, don't let me interrupt your question and answer session, Alec, with my stream. I mean, I can see people are asking Alec questions. Yeah. Okay, all yours, Alec. You deal with them. So the idea of the expedition is the other thing that's key. So Into the Odd, this was right there at the forefront. It said, in fact, in this one, it does say that the expedition will change you. And it's all about framing. There are lots of games that try and do everything. Even like D&D. I think in modern versions of D&D, they talk about all the different ways you can play. Like, it doesn't have to be a dungeon crawl. And I wanted things to be a little bit more focused so that you can go off the beaten track. You don't have to do it as an expedition, but this is like the default mode of play for the game. Because I always think people that want to do something different with it, like if you did want to make run a session that was more like a heist in Electric Bastionland, you could do it. I think I've probably been clear enough in my guidance that people would be confident doing that. But if you're coming to the game new, I think having that default there is really useful, and it gets you started. The rival, yeah. The rival very nearly got cut at the last minute, because in a lot of my games that I run, I don't use the rival. Because I think it's a great tool to have, but I don't use it as a default myself. But I wanted it to be there again as the default for people that are coming new to the game. And then people that do want to drop the rival, they can do it. But this is just another sort of driver to help push the players toward adventure and apply pressure to them and get them in the, you know, this very core of the game is get the treasure before the rival gets there. If I go quiet, I'm occasionally glancing over to the questions, which is a very poor form of me. What I'll do is I will get through this spread and then I will stop for questions, and we'll do this professionally. Because we're gonna up our game today. I feel like it's the start of a new chapter, literally, and also it's a start of a new chapter because I need to up my game, and I can tell we've got a lot of people watching tonight. The pressure is on, so I'm going to get through this spread and then answer the questions perfectly. So encounters, and yeah, the main. I'm just going to go through like the main things here that I think are the crucial things, and you notice the pattern. I don't think I've mentioned the whole 3 bullet point thing yet, which, like so many things in this book, started as a joke basically, because I just noticed I was doing like 3 bullet point lists for lots of things in my own notes, and I already had these 3 bullet point principles for each area of the world. So I had the 3 principles of Bastion with 3 bullet points, that have changed slightly over the years, but I find it easy to remember a list of 3 things. And it also kind of, when you're writing, it gets you focused as well. If I say you can only write 3 bullet points about this city, it's a restriction, and it makes you get creative, and it makes you really drill down to the essence of what you're trying to say. So I find it really useful, and I thought, can I make the whole thing 3 bullet point lists? And it kind of is for the most part. There's some exceptions, but it is mostly 3 bullet point lists for that reason. And it's not a big dense wall of text. And much has been said about the format of the book and the fact that it's quite large. In terms of the layout, it's quite spacious. But when this sounds like this is an excuse because I just wanted a big heavy book on my shelf. But I do find the wall of text, things just get lost for me. And I wanted you to be able to read this page and really take it all in and go back to it and reference it. So when you're prepping your game, you can go, okay, checklist. So I'm looking at my encounters. Does my encounter have all 3 of the following? Does it have a drive? Will it have impact? And does it have flavor? And again, it's the kind of thing you're going to forget to do it occasionally, but you come back to it and you check it. It's these little habits to get into. The layered description, sort of tucked away here, is something I still use that a lot. And as I've seen this a number of places before me, I didn't sort of come up with this, but the idea of laying out a dungeon in this kind of way. I know that the new supplement for Mothership, which I think Luke Gearing is involved in, writing entirely himself maybe. What's it called? Gradient Descent. That's kind of a dungeon for Mothership. And that uses a very similar kind of thing, almost like, I know Sean was talking about calling them clickables. So you have the main immediately obvious features of the room are things that you might click on if you were playing like an adventure game. So you have that there's a desk and a mirror and a rug on the ground. And then in there you nest the actual information about what it is, so that when I flick open as the conductor, I can say, okay, you walk in a room, there is a table, there is a rug, and there is a mirror. And I would probably want to embellish it a little bit more than that, but it gets that focus there. And again, it's just moving things forwards and keeps the pace of the game quick, which I like. And again, threats. But there's more about this later on, but the idea that the more dangerous a threat is, the more obvious it should be. That's pretty key. And then here we go. Oh, questions. Yeah, okay, let's do this. We're doing it properly. Here we go. Questions we had are so Doc Larry Sportello. I have a question about integrating warfare and placing the adventure between the lines of combatants, abstract or traditional. Any tips on giving the expedition a real sense of epicness? Oh, and you may place this in the stars above. I wrote a blog post today about the living stars and what's happening with them. So if you're any questions about the living stars, you can look to bastionland.com. And epicness, I will just admit that epicness is not my strength. I like a grounded game. In terms of running the game, I feel like that's where my strength is, in keeping things relatively grounded. Epic stuff is not something I would feel particularly confident advising about at the moment. I think however epic you go, if you want the scale to be big, I think you've got to at some point remember to keep it grounded. I know that that's what I've just said is my thing, but I think when you think about great films that are like epic films and epic stories, they still have a grounding element. They're still like characters you can relate to and you can understand how they're feeling. And I think if you go too epic and crazy, it's hard to put yourself in that situation. So I think my advice for an epic game is don't make it too epic. You can have that epic flavor, but remember to keep things grounded as well. Yeah, Sean F. Smith says, Electric Bastionland is so large that it needs to fight Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay off your shelves. I went through and weighed it against a number of books, and they're back there somewhere. Realms of Chaos, the old Warhammer supplement, 2-part Slaves to Darkness and Lost and the Damned books. They weigh about the same. These are the reprints, so I can't speak to the originals, but it weighs about the same as them, so that's pretty good. Yeah, pretty good company to be in. Yeah, Alec agrees with me, and he's an artist, so he knows what he's talking about the 3 bullet points. Any bits of info or Are there any bits of info or world building that you'd had in the book for ages, thought was irreplaceable, but eventually cut off as you solidified the 3 bullet format? If I see them, I'll let you know when we get to the sections on Bastion and Deep Country and the Underground. I don't think so. I think, if anything, if something was really important, I sort of spread it to its own little set of bullet points. Anyway, it's no questions for now. We'll get back to that. So, a technique that I do use a lot still. This is my like go-to thing for writing anything. Just if I need a list of rooms for a dungeon, if I need a list of characters, if I need a list of monsters, I do this seasoning your ideas thing. And you basically start with just one concept. So in the example, I use brain in a jar, but brain in a jar, to me, that's like my vanilla. That's like my go-to thing, because I love brains in jars. I have no idea why. But to use a even more plain vanilla example, let's say it's a goblin. If you're writing D&D, so your idea might be a goblin, and then you write 6 more. So you go, right, this dungeon is going to have rats, goblins, spiders. In fact, let's do this. Let's do this. Can I get Notepad up? Is that what we're doing? Yeah, streaming Notepad live. Welcome to 2020. I'm gonna whack up the size of this font so you can all enjoy this. Can I get an even? Let's do it in Korea. Let's party like it's 1989. No, Korea's awful. I immediately regret this. So I'm gonna put us in Arial for maximum boring fontland. So let's say we were doing a table of encounters for. I'm going to use D&D. I'm not going to use Electric Bastionland because I think the problem is Electric Bastionland is just too interesting already. I want to start with something really boring and show how this sort of seasoning idea can make it great. So what I'll do is I'll think of the 6 most boring things we can have for a dungeon. So we're going to have a goblin, a goblin, and a spider, and a rat, and an orc, and come on, give me some, guys. Two more boring things for a dungeon. I told you we were raising the game today. We're doing interactivity. 2 more boring dungeon denizens, please. A zombie. Thank you, Zapbeer. Pit trap is solid, actually. Yeah, I know you're not going to have a pit trap on your wandering monster encounter, maybe. But yeah, so you start with that, and then let's look at what it says. So it says, go through each one by one. No, Sean, you got it wrong. Gelatinous cubes are already too good. Like, yeah, Sherlock Hall gets it. Sean, how do I ban someone from this? How do I kick Sean out of this? Gelatinous cubes, come on. They're already too good. So, go through each one by one, add a new detail that wouldn't be assumed. So, there's no point me putting a sneaky goblin, or a disgusting goblin, or a mischievous goblin. So, I'll come up with, you guys can come up with the ones for orc, zombie, and pit trap. So for goblin, I'm going to say like a sophisticated goblin. For the spider, I know a ghost spider isn't that cool yet, but it doesn't have to be crazy, but it can just be something you wouldn't automatically assume. So there's no point saying a giant spider or a venomous spider. Rat. Rat. I mean, I'm going to say helpful. Helpful rat. Orc. So, you know, when I think of orc, I think of fighters. So I'm going to say a, like a, what's the word I'm after? For like a scholar orc. And then zombie, poetic zombie. Thank you, Doc. Pit trap. Oh yeah, I'm just going to do, wandering pit trap. So this is already like fine. Like this is better than a lot of what I see in pre-made D&D adventures. But step 3, repeat this process until your world is alive. So we could go through one more. So we've got like a prefix. Let's do a suffix. And again, it can't just be expanding on the same idea. So we know it's a goblin, so I don't need to say it's sneaky or filthy. And we know it's sophisticated, so there's no point in me saying a sophisticated goblin connoisseur. No, it needs to be something that doesn't fit either of those. So what doesn't fit with either of those? A sophisticated goblin. In fact, yeah, let's. I was imagining one, so let's just have a sophisticated goblin rabble. Ghost spider. Okay. Ghost spider with. It could be something that it's doing. It could be. Ghost spider arguing with its killer. Helpful rat. So this sounds pretty cute. I'm imagining like a Ratatouille style rat being helpful. So we're gonna actually twist it. I'm gonna say helpful, like fake, helpful rat traitor. So like a traitor to rat kind, and he's being insincere. Scholar orc, looking for approval, always good. So I'm thinking like an insecure student orc, like he's trying to impress you with the stories of what he did on his gap year. So what have we got here? Music critic. Yeah, we've already got music critic. Marketing butcher. Poetic zombie butcher. Yeah, okay. Wandering pit trap. This is already so bonkers. I think it needs something to ground it slightly. Wandering pit trap. So how is it wandering? Like it's just it's the underground, so it can just like move through the ground itself. Wandering pit trap filled with bored victims. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you this is the greatest content ever written, but this is a pretty solid encounter table if you want to have a weird dungeon. Sophisticated goblin rabble. Maybe they're all trying to like outdo each other with how sophisticated they are. Like Goblin Fraser and Goblin Niles. And then like 6 other ones. Ghost spider arguing with its killer. I don't know, but it's something. Fake helpful rat traitor. I actually like this. I like the idea that he's a traitor to rat kind. Like he's saying, like, come on, I'll show you where the other rats are. I'll let you. I'll show you where they keep the cheese. But he's actually waiting to betray you. Scholar orc looking for, yeah, grad student orc is great. That's solid. Poetic zombie butcher. So it could still be like a dangerous monster. The problem with this is they end up so fleshed out. You can't just like walk up and fight them because they've all got something going on. But you could still have him be like a hostile, vicious zombie. But he's just saying like poetic one-liners as he tries to chop bits off you. And a wandering pit trap filled with bored victims. I don't know. That needs work. But I appreciate the challenge we set ourselves there. Right. You know what? Let's keep this notepad up. This is our new thing. Okay. So yeah, seasoning ideas. Now, I need to take a drink before the next bit because it's it's a toughie. What went wrong here, everyone? Foreground growth. 4 bullet points. So it's an example of sometimes you have to have more than 3 bullet points. And it's one of those things where it's all well and good setting yourself hard rules and saying like, this is a rule, we're going to do it this way. But you have to always consider, if you stick to the rules most of the time that you set yourself, you have to understand there's probably going to be a time when you can break that rule, but you've got to make sure it's the right time for it. And here I could have probably condensed them into 3, but I wanted them to be, I needed all 4 of these in here. So foreground growth is the idea that, well, exactly what it says here. Character growth happens during play and not in between sessions. So it's not that we come together once a week and we play our characters and we go on an adventure and some stuff might happen. We might get some treasure, we might find some cool things, but it's not then that we go away and we take our character sheets home with us and look over the rulebook and choose new abilities and come back and say, right, I've leveled up, I'm level 4, I've got this new spell and this new ability. I wanted it to, this was a good example of something I did want to be a hard rule. I said, no, everything's got to be coming from gameplay. And that's why HP is now gained through scars. So when you get scarred, you gain more HP potentially. You don't just come back stronger between sessions. If it's going to change you, it's going to change you in a session. So my goal was you could look back on your character sheet and be like, yeah, I remember this happening. I remember getting this weird oddity. I remember learning this ability. And it's tricky. It's something I would like to expand more on in the future with more specific examples, because it's one of these things where I've said like, yeah, well, just make sure all your monsters have cool ways to like affect the characters forever and change them. But there aren't. I would like to have had more examples in there because it is kind of tricky to do that if you've not done it before. But we'll get onto that a bit more because there's a bit of an expansion on that in the addendum. There's an article, an essay about this that I'll get them to. High impact. This is a concept that I had in my head for a while, but it was a post by Arnold Kemp on Goblin Punch that really locked it in, and it was called Impact, I think. And it really pinned down something that I'd struggled to put into words that I'd found difficult about some other RPGs. I'm not going to sit here and badmouth D&D, but it is a bit of an issue with 5th edition D&D, and even older editions, to be honest. The lack of impact. So combat is a really obvious one. You might swing and miss. Okay, you didn't do any impact. You might swing and hit and do like and roll a 2 on your d12 for damage. So it's like, oh, okay. You might hit, roll 12 damage, but it's a big hit point sponge monster that's absorbing all these hits, and it's like, right, okay. So I really wanted things to have impact. If you make a decision to do something, it's going to have impact, but it goes both ways, and things are going to impact you a lot harder as well. And interesting choices. So this I will come back to because it's explained in a bit more detail, but this information, choice, impact trinity is perhaps the most important bit of the book for running the game. If you remember these 3, you can get away with not knowing a lot of other stuff that's in the book. And then we have our first spark table. I meant to bring some d20s with me. Shall I run downstairs and get 2 d20? Oh, yeah, okay. I'll go in a sec. But yeah, Pele Jones asks, is it spark to spark my imagination? Yeah. These spark tables are, the idea, they were called spark tables very early on, before I went in with like Conductor and the full on like electric thing. And they are there to spark your imagination, and it's to give you 2 ideas that don't necessarily go together. So it's kind of an expansion of what we were looking at with the seasoning your ideas. It kind of becomes like a pre-seasoned idea. So I'm not gonna run and get my d20s. Instead, I'm gonna bring up a little dice roller, and we're gonna roll some d20s. Yeah, I do have a whole Twitch audience that could roll dice for me, but I like rolling dice, so I'm just going to do it here. So what we'll do is we'll roll some dice, and we've got our notepad, we've got our incredibly cluttered thing we've got going on here, but I'm sticking with it, and we're going to use the spark tables for what they were meant to do. So random game inspiration. So let's do this properly. Let's put this here, and let's put this down here, there for now. So we're gonna get sometimes they're just called spark tables, and they're just called sparks. We don't have like column titles, if you like. But here we've got place, person, object, and looming threat, and this is kind of like a double spark table that works together. So this is giving us a starting point for a game, so let's do one. So we're rolling on the first one. So we've got 9 and 20. So our place is Swamp Village, and our person is number 20, a vengeful survivor. And then let's do 2 more. And then our object is an antidote. Would love an antidote right now. And the looming threat is swelling riots. I mean, whenever I do this kind of live example, I worry. But that to me is like, that kind of writes itself. You know, Swap Village, come on. Are we back? Can you hear me? We're back. So while you're gone, I wrote the most incredible adventure. Yes, okay. We're back. I don't know if this was an issue at my end. I have my knee dangerously close to my little Wi-Fi dongle that my computer uses, so there's every chance that I nudged it. But yeah, let's crack on. So the 4 things that we got here were the Swamp Village, the Vengeful Survivor, the Antidote, and Swelling Riots. So I think this is a really easy one. Whenever we do this kind of live rolling, I always worry I'm going to get like the most boring results that are on here. But it turns out they're all good, and I think having a deep country village in the middle of a swamp that was maybe wiped out by a disease, a swamp plague, and the antidote being key to that, and there being riots that could rise up as a result of this. This gives you a lot to work with already. So it doesn't give you any solid answers, but it gives you a starting point. It gives you a spark. That's the idea. So yeah, we'll do that for each spark table actually. See if we can do a little test drive for each one. Conducting the game. Swelling. Oh, swelling riots. Yeah, it could be riots of people that have like swelling as a symptom of this plague. Yeah. So conducting the game is a combination of hosting, refereeing, and playing the game. And I really wanted that in there. I wanted the idea that you are still playing the game. You're just playing in a slightly different way to the other players. You've got a very specific role. So that is pretty key for me. And then we'll get onto this this idea of information that I've harped on about over and over and over again. And yeah, I always tend to say, if in doubt, give more information. And at my table, it's never backfired. I think there are people that would say you can give too much information where you end up giving the game away. But I think it's very difficult for me to see that happening, because I see so many games where you don't get enough information, you can't make an informed choice, and you don't have an interesting choice ahead of you because you don't know enough. And I think if everyone gave a little bit more information, maybe there'd be better games. And yeah, so giving information, tell them the current situation. When they ask a question, give your answer and ask a question back. So again, I don't necessarily do that every single time, but it just keeps things moving. So it's not just you sat there answering a torrent of questions. If you tell them that they're in a room in the underground, and you say that you smell a weird smell, and they say, well, what does it smell like? And you say, oh, it smells kind of like damp, and you hear some chain noises of moving chains around the corner. What do you do? So it puts the pressure back on them. You don't give the answer and then they sit there and discuss the answer for 10 minutes. And if you think they have misunderstood, clarify. So I hear this before, where a GM will trick the players by saying that they will describe a room and the players have obviously missed a detail, and they just either they didn't hear it or they misunderstood what you meant by it. Swelling and swelling being a good example. Maybe you used a word that could be interpreted two ways and they've obviously misunderstood it. And if you think they've misunderstood it and you let them make a mistake, you're not some brilliant GM. That isn't like clever play. You've just, well done. Like, what do you want? You could have just told them, because your job is to make them feel like they are there. And if it's something they should have noticed when they're there, I would tell them. I'd say, look, you know, just to say again, there is a giant boulder rolling down this hill, and you seem to be not aware of that fact. And then this whole section here is kind of like a flowchart almost. I mean, a flowchart would have been great, but it is kind of like on the blog I called it the procedure for play. So you work your way down this list. So first of all, can it be a dilemma? If it's not interesting enough to be a dilemma, you could just make it happen. If not, call for a save. So the first two go-to options don't involve rolling dice. It's just conversational play. And yeah, being a good conductor, be honest, be fair, be confident. This was quite a late edition as well, but I feel like I wanted something in there. I wanted something outside of the procedure. I wanted some principles, because you can put all the rules in place, but I find principles are much more powerful than rules in many ways. Explaining what you're trying to achieve can be just as useful as telling people how to achieve it. I think it's useful to have both, but some people respond really well to this challenge of like being told to be fair. So hopefully this whole procedure explains how to be fair, and the whole book is built around this. And the book should give you enough ideas to be confident, and the book should be telling you that you should be honest, because like I say, there's things like give more information, but just having them outlined here and bolded, I think sends a message as well. And then this, if there's one page you're going to have open during play, this is the one that you should have open when you're running the game, if you're only going to have one of them. And there's just lots of little useful things here. So answering questions, give them enough information to make things interesting, suggest a way to investigate and get more information, and suggest a specialist that knows more. So give information, but when I say give them more information, I don't mean tell them literally everything. Give them a way to find out more. So if they're trying to research something, you don't just tell them everything. You say, well, you know this, this, this. And if you want more, you know, there's a library that you could try and get to, but it's across a broken tram route. Or this person that you know from way back, they might know more about it. Ah, is this our first like spam bot in chat? That's how I know I've made it. So Fizding, we had a question earlier that was about telegraphing on the dangers of traps. Could you elaborate on that? I will if I can find the question. Let me go back. Oh. I'm looking for this question on traps. Ah, here we go. Valthek. Question with regards to the danger / obvious scale. I found that an unusual statement when I first read it, as it implies that traps are almost never a surprise if they are dangerous. Does that mean or imply that traditional pitfalls, poison needles in locks are not a thing? How would you advise dealing with such things? So, in the addendum, there is a 2-page spread talking about this. It's called, I forget the number, like 34 good traps, and it explains how this works. And when I say with traps especially, they're kind of a special case. In reality, if you were designing a trap to stop an intruder getting in to wherever you're guarding, you would want it to be extremely effective. You'd want it to be potentially hidden if you're trying to use it to actually trap someone, or if you're trying to make a death trap, you're trying to kill someone for trying to intrude on your area, then you'd want to make it really well hidden. You want to make it super deadly, and you'd want to make it effective. And if you do all those three things, that's in real life what you would want. But in games, what happens is it's not interesting to me, because it's punishing you for not thinking there could be a trap here. And in certain types of dungeon crawl game, you know, going along with the 10-foot pole or checking every lock for traps is a part of the game, but it's not what I wanted this game to be. I wanted this game to be more about problem solving than problem finding, if you see what I mean. So disarming the trap to me is more disarming or bypassing the trap is more interesting than trying to find the trap. And it's not, I'm not saying this should be the way for every game, but this is what I found worked for me. So I wouldn't have, so if you're talking about a pit trap in the sense that it's in the ground, it's indistinguishable from the ground around it, you would only find it if you were tapping ahead with a 10-foot pole, or if you were checking the tires on the ground. So I would not have that in my game, because when I think about it, I think, well, what's likely to happen is the players they're not gonna, if I haven't encouraged them to check every tile on the corridor, they're going to be walking ahead, they're going to get to the trap, they're going to trigger it and fall down into the pit, and it's not that interesting. What I like is a point of a decision point between the moment when you realize there's a trap and the moment when the trap hits you with whatever it's packing. There should be a decision point. So for the pit example, one that I do like is they're walking down the corridor, a pit trap falls open, they fall into the water, and then they notice there's piranhas swarming around them. What do you do? And there's a key what do you do moment, and the players might be able to throw a rope down, get them up, and it can still be deadly, but it's not the same as if they're walking down and there's a spiked pit trap, and you say, okay, the pit trap opens, you fall down, you hit the spikes, you take 25 damage, and either you're dead or you're not. There's no decision point then. It's like, oh, well, that happened, now I've got to climb back up. So there's some examples later on. There's 34 examples of traps that have a decision point, and that's the factor for me. You can still have your pit traps and your needle traps and your spear traps, but you've got to have a decision point between the trigger and the effect. Okay. Chamay asks, when you talk about not giving enough information, you're not talking about information that invites to metagaming. The thing with Electric Bastionland is there's so little system here, there's not much metagaming to do, I guess. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what exactly you mean by metagaming in this context. When I think about metagaming, I think of things like in D&D, when you come across like a troll, and one of the players knows, oh, it's a troll, fireworks. You know, it'll regenerate until we use fire on it. And That's neither a good nor a bad thing to happen, depending on how you want the game to be. But I'm not sure if you can clarify that question a little bit. Shamael will happily come back to that. So when they fight, this was very much inspired by, well, this is a very trimmed down version of it, but in Silent Titans by Patrick Stewart, there is a little chapter at the start about making interesting encounters, and it's full of great ideas, but essentially a lot of it boils down to, don't just have your encounter be with a monster in an empty room. Make the monster more interesting, and make the area more interesting, and have the combat change and make it be dynamic. So here I have, at the start of each round, describe something that's changed. So even though combat is fast in Bastionland, I still want it to be changing. So if a round ended with everyone just hit each other and everyone's now a little bit weaker, I would like something new to change. So it could be that the monster has changed its strategy. It's now running away, or it's calling for help, or instead of attacking this person, it sort of pushes them away and it goes after a different character. And then we're getting on to conducting the game continued. Luck tables. Right, so luck tables. They started life in Into the Odd as just there was a little rule that said, if something is being left to chance and it's not based on your strength or dexterity or charisma, well, willpower in Into the Odd, then just roll a d6. If it's high, it favors the players. If it's low, it doesn't. And it was just left at that. And I had lots of people tell me that they found this really useful, even though it's like the most basic thing you can imagine. So what I wanted to do was, I wanted to keep that idea, but I wanted to see if I could give it a little bit more bite and a little bit more, sort of give some examples of how it's used here. And it's just got one little bit more structure than normal, and it ties it in with the encounter roll, which is nice, because now there's one less mechanic in the game than there was in Into the Odd. But yeah, this idea of a roll of 1 means it's a crisis. It means something bad has happened right away and something has changed the situation drastically. 2 to 3 means, something's going to get bad soon. And 4+ means it's fine. The encounter roll is sort of the classic example here. And I like that you're more likely to get a clue to a wandering encounter than to actually just bump into them straight away. There's still a chance that you're just going to meet them, but generally you're going to get a clue. And it means that you're not going to go too far without hitting a wandering encounter, because you've got like a 50% chance of either getting a clue that it's nearby or it being right there. So places don't feel too abandoned if you use this system. But yeah, some of the examples, I wanted that this was a good place to put things that I might have been tempted to put in the game as like an actual rule, but here I could just do it as an example and say, like, yeah, you can use this. So the one that I've spoken about before, I think, is the using shoddy equipment table. A little bit during the development of Electric Bastionland, one of the decisions I made early on for the failed careers, originally they all started with like a proper weapon. So everyone got like a sword or a pistol or a spear or like an actual proper weapon. And I went back and I thought, no, I want some of these. It doesn't make sense that some of these would have a weapon, like an outright weapon. So some of them start with things like a frying pan or something you could use as a weapon potentially, but you're going to want to get a better weapon. And it ties into this foreground growth thing where, your sword might have come from your first adventure. You might have had to, steal it from a guard, or you kill a monster and take whatever weapon they had. And I like this idea of having to, find weapons in the environment and constantly improvise, and maybe you have to use improvised weapons more than regular weapons. And at the time, I was playing a lot of Breath of the Wild on the Switch, which is one of my favourite games of all time. But in Breath of the Wild, you might know where this is going. When you use a weapon, they pretty quickly deteriorate and they break. And this is to encourage you to constantly be looking for new weapons. And it was a very controversial addition to the game, and it's very annoying in play, but I see why they did it. So I actually had a thought where I was like, hey, maybe in Electric Bastionland, the weapons should break like in Breath of the Wild, and there's a chance that you're going to end up with no weapons because they're broken, and then you're going to have to improvise, and it'll be cool because it'll create all these fun situations where you have to improvise a way to attack this monster because all your weapons are broken. And I decided not to, because I think I posted it on G+ and said, hey guys, what do you think about weapon deterioration as a mechanic in Into the Odd? And it was not popular, and I thought, and it was just too much. But here, it's in here as a rule for when you're using shoddy equipment. So if you've built yourself a makeshift flamethrower out of a gas canister and a hose pipe, then yeah, you can use it, but when you do, I'm going to roll on this table, and there's a 1 in 6 chance it's going to blow up, or there's a 2 in 6 chance that it's going to just start leaking gas out everywhere. And yeah, it kind of links up with other things, like it just sets the scene, like engaging in bureaucracy. I don't know if I would ever use this table in reality, but the fact that it's there tells you about the setting. Going gambling, I quite like that when you go gambling, it's pretty low risks. Like, there's a 1 in 6 chance you're going to lose everything, but then, you know, you might make a profit or just come out even. But it's, when you're gambling, it's not about the money, it's about the social side of it here, I think. So yeah, now let me just see where we are. Okay, so we are about to enter Bastion. So we'll make this the last spread that I will talk about, and then next week we will start with this glorious spread here. And I've got a lot to say. In fact, I'm gonna, can I hide myself? I'm gonna let you have a little look at this, because I have lots to say about this piece, as you might imagine. But yeah, we're not going to talk about that now. We're gonna just look at this side here. So this is my map of the setting. This is as much detail as I want on here. You've got the living stars above, the underground below, and then Bastion in the middle with Deep Country trailing off to the sides, and they're all connected. And that is as close as I'm going to get to drawing a map of the world, because this is not a setting that has maps, and it's not a setting that has a canon. I'm saying this off the top of my head, and I realise this is literally the first thing I've said here. So there are reasons in the setting as to why there are no maps, but it is also for the reason that I've said before about so many things in this book, is that the setting is there to serve the game. I'm not precious about the setting. If I were writing a novel about it, it might have been different. If I was trying to make a film, it might be different. But this is a game, and the setting has to serve the game. The game 100% is more important than the setting in my eyes. And I don't mean the game in terms of the necessarily even the rules and the numbers. I mean that the sitting down at the table experience, because that's what this is for. It's not meant to just be a world that you can read about in a book and be like, oh yes, this is really interesting. This city of Bastion, yes, this reads really well. It's not about that. This is about a world that you can actually play a game in. So one thing is that there's no maps. There's no timelines. I make fun of books that have timelines a lot, so apologies to all those books that do have a timeline at the start. I think, is it Cinnabar? I always get Cinnabar and Rifts mixed up. I think Cinnabar starts with a gigantic timeline of events that have no context at all. So it'll say like 3082 in the era of BA. the Xanathars attack the googly bugs, and it'll just be like, it's just fantasy bingo, like names and events that you don't know anything about yet, so it doesn't make any sense. I mean, yeah, Zach Beer says both are terrible. I kind of admire how bonkers they both are. Rifts, I think, has some redeeming flavour in there. There's something about Rifts that is compelling to me, but the system I cannot understand. I can see there's quite a few questions coming in. I will answer more questions before we finish, but let me just get through this page. One of the key things I want to get to is this world of possibilities. So this whole world was created so that you can put your ideas somewhere, because I don't tell you what's in Bastion. There are examples and there's guidelines, but you've got to come up with cool places to put in your version of Bastion. And the idea with this world, excuse me, the idea with this world is that there's somewhere for your idea, no matter what it is. So if it doesn't fit in a city, it might fit in the deep country. If it doesn't fit in deep country, it will almost certainly fit in the underground, because the underground just breaks all the rules. And if it still doesn't feel quite right, the living stars is left quite open, so that you could potentially put anything there. Again, the living stars, there's a blog post today about that on bastionland.com, so I'm not going to go too much into the living stars now because I wrote about it earlier today. But yeah, the key thing here is that it's a setting that serves the game, and great piece of artwork here. This kind of hourglass motif that we saw on the failed citizen artwork. Yeah, I love it, and I like that you've got. Yeah, it's literally all four parts of the setting, which it took me. I didn't notice this. I obviously saw that you had the stars and Bastion, and then I noticed that you had the underground, and then deep country. You got the sun and the. We're back. We're back. We're back. Maybe. It's telling me that I'm back. So yeah, I'm thinking I'm back. So I hope you got the last bit of that section. God knows how I'm going to pull this bit together for YouTube. I will try and piece together one video out of this mess. But yeah, let me go through and get to some of the questions that we had while I was chatting away. Shamay, clarifying about metagaming. Thank you. Yeah, I know Bastionland is not very traditional in that sense, but if there were a werewolf allergic to silver, how do you inform the players about this thread without inviting to metagaming? Or would you say it's okay to let the players have it? So to use your example of, say, a monster that has a vulnerability. So let's use the werewolf example. Let's pretend that in this adventure, the main threat is a werewolf. And silver is literally the silver bullet. Like, that will get rid of them. It's their kryptonite. If the players asked me, so if the players, or I wouldn't use a werewolf specifically like that for that reason, because you know, the players might already know that, and that's a separate thing about whether or not players knowing weaknesses is a bad thing. But let's pretend I've got a new monster then. So we'll call it a werewolf, but it'll be something new and it's got a new weakness. Let's say this werewolf is, I'm looking around the room for inspiration. Let's say they are terrified of globes. You show them a map or a globe to this monster and it freaks them out. Their like head explodes. So when the players encounter this monster, I wouldn't tell them, oh, by the way, you know that this monster, you show them a map and their head will explode. But I would answer questions if they asked. If they ask smart questions, I'd give them good answers. So if they say, does this monster have any weaknesses? I wouldn't tell them straight away. I would say, well, you know, what are you asking? You could ask someone who has encountered the monster, and if they go and investigate, then I might tell them something. Maybe there's an eyewitness account that it was repelled by this map or something. So I wouldn't just give them it straight away. I would reward investigation and reward good questions. That's the key. I wouldn't hold back information, but I also wouldn't just throw the answer into their lap straight away without them asking. Pele Jones. It's not a question, but I really appreciate the thing here. At the risk of sounding really corny, it does mean a lot when I hear people saying that they've really enjoyed playing the game. I've said that the game was honestly designed for me because it was the game that I wanted. So the fact that other people are enjoying it as well is reassuring, and it's just fantastic. So I always love hearing that. Oddsbod Alec says, what between the stars, Deep Country, Underground, is there one that you found players want to spend more or less time in than you expected? Out of all of them, the one that I think the one that they've found out of the three, I think the Underground is quite tough, because I tend to default to the Underground for like one-shot dungeon crawls style things, but I think Deep Country, it's very easy to make it captivating because it kind of feels more character driven to me, and same with Bastion. I think those both connect really well with players. The Underground can be a bit more hit and miss in my experience. Sean F. Smith. Question. Bastionland manages to evoke... Oh, come on. You're giving me French to... fin de cycle, which I don't know. End of a cycle? You'll have to help me out with the meaning of this one. But without the imperialism cosplay of steampunk. How did you manage that? So, it's interesting because I've heard people describe, end of the century. Sorry, that makes perfect sense. It definitely is definitely tapping into that early 20th century thing. And for a while, I messed with the name Art Nouveau instead of Art Nouveau, and like it was called like an odd epoch. What was it called? Odd epoch, like Belle Epoque. So it was definitely tapping into that early 20th century feel, and I didn't want it to be imperialist fantasy. I mean, that should kind of go without saying. And there's references to that on the very last page of the book. There's a little last word section that says about how just because this game might feel like you're in the 1900s, that doesn't mean you can act like you're in the 1900s at the table. And just because this game draws on games from the 1970s doesn't mean you can have a table that's like tables were in the 1970s. And it's tricky because people would often ask if the game is steampunk, because it kind of is an obvious hook for people to say, oh yeah, it's a steampunk game. You know, there could be a Zeppelin here. That would make sense. It would make sense if somebody was that there's trains and they're a big focus of the setting. So yeah, it's in terms of avoiding the imperialism cosplay, I just tried to make it so that even though Bastion is very clearly inspired by London, if only just because London is the huge city that I have the most experience with, I didn't want to draw on specifics. I wanted it to be broad enough that you could read it as any city in the world. And I think Alec's art style really helped with that, because if I could illustrate my own book, I'm sure if I had drawn it, it would have ended up looking a lot like a British city, just because that's my experience. But I think Alec managed to make it look different enough that it doesn't just feel like we're romanticizing London here. We're not just saying, yeah. It's tricky. I'm trying to think how to phrase it. This is a really interesting question, and as you can tell, I'm thinking about it very hard right now, because it is something that I wrestled with during the design of it, and I hope that I did an okay job at avoiding some of the pitfalls. That might be one for a blog post, Sean. So I hope that muddled answer gives you something to work with for now. But yeah, I just went into it knowing that I didn't want it to be celebrating colonialism. And that's part of the reason why there was previously the Golden Lands, which were kind of like a new world at the setting, and they're gone. And just because I wanted the exploration to be different to that, I didn't want it to be the idea of going to the new world and settling it and colonizing it, because while that can be done well, it requires a lot of structure for it to be done sensibly, let's say. Cool, so we got to a pretty good stopping off point. We got to the start of the Bastion section, so same time next week I will be looking at the Bastion section of Electric Bastionland. Thank you for the kind words, Sean, that is a relief. So I believe we are done. Thank you everyone for tuning in. So far every week we've had slightly fewer viewers each week, and then I think this week we've gone slightly up. So I know that a lot of people watch this on YouTube, but it is really cool having you guys here to chat through it with me while we do it. That's what makes it fun. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you everyone for your kind words. And I will now do my ultra smooth sign off if my keyboard shortcuts are just not cooperating. One of these weeks I will get like a proper smooth end of the Twitch stream thing going on, but today is not that day. So for now, goodbye.